Welcome back to Washington Watch. I'm Tony Perkins. I put my hands on the numbers I was making reference to earlier. Just to put this in context in terms of Planned Parenthood needing the money from the Small Business Administration's Paycheck Protection Program. For fiscal year 2017, Planned Parenthood reported a profit of $244.8 million. In fiscal year 2018, Planned Parenthood generated its highest gross revenue ever, coming in at $1.6 billion. In fiscal year 2018, Planned Parenthood reported unrestricted net assets of $2.2 billion, up from $802 million in fiscal year 2017. So, do they need taxpayer money? It would not look that way. But just like Democrats on Capitol Hill, the United Nations, some there, they don't want to waste a good crisis. The United Nations taking the opportunity in the coronavirus response to promote abortion as an essential service with a $2 billion response, global response, I should say, funded in large part by the United States generosity. The United Nations is promoting this globally. Well, the USAID has said, hey, not so fast. In fact, the acting director of the USAID, which is the United States agency that deals in humanitarian aid internationally, we help other countries through USAID, they have said, hey, not so fast. So joining me now to talk about this is the acting director of USAID. That is John Barsa. John, welcome to Washington Watch.
Well, thank you so very much, Tony. It's an honor and pleasure to be with you today.
Well, thanks for joining us. I want to just start with the most basic question. Why did you feel the need to send this letter to the United Nations last week?
Well, I absolutely did feel a need to send the letter. But for your listeners, just to recap, what USAID is we're pretty much the point of the spear for American generosity. In the history of the planet, there are no people as generous as the people of the United States of America. So it's the honor and privilege of a lifetime to have been picked by President Trump to serve as the acting administrator for USAID. We work on protecting life, fighting for religious freedom, strengthening democracy and governance programs, honoring strong markets. Basically, we're working to make a safer and more prosperous world, which means a safer, more prosperous America. So in the course of doing this work, it was noted how the UN, with a global response plan to this respiratory ailment of COVID, they were putting language in there which was promoting abortion. So the timing was absolutely it was absolutely necessary to send the letter that I did when I did it, to basically reiterate the administration policy of not this abhorrent practice. And as the greatest donor to the United Nations, these programs, we want nothing of it. We're absolutely, it was an absolute perfect time to send the letter because it was this nonsense just had to stop.
I think this is extremely important, John, because the United States, as you said, we're the biggest donor to the United Nations. We, out of our generosity, Americans are one of the, not just corporately as a government, but even privately as individuals, we give more than any other nation. But speaking of these government dollars, I think it's completely reasonable that as American taxpayers put money into the United Nations, that American values should flow with those American dollars.
Absolutely. Nobody should have been surprised at this. Tony, I think most of your listeners, should remember what President Trump said at the United Nations General Assembly last year. I think it's worth reading the quote just to remind everybody. To remind everybody, this is the most pro-life president in history. Mm-hmm. So last year, before the UN, he said the following: "My administration is also building an international coalition to dispel the concept of abortion as a fundamental human right. So far, 24 nations representing more than 1 billion people have joined this important cause. We oppose any projects that attempt to assert a global right to a taxpayer-funded abortion on demand up to the moment of delivery, and we will never tire of defending innocent life at home or abroad." Tony, I am proud to share with you USAID is working in concert with other departments and agencies in the Trump administration to build on this international coalition. Our position cannot be more clear under the leadership of President Trump and Vice President Pence. We are rock solid and in line and fighting the fight.
Let me ask you, have you heard back from the UN Secretary General?
We have not heard back from the Secretary General, but certainly we've been getting calls. I mean, it is there in his letter. Sexual and reproductive health and sexual reproductive health and rights is mentioned 14 times. It's undeniable. I have a copy of the report right here. So what I laid out in my letter was undeniable proof that they are going in a direction that we, the largest funder, do not approve of.
And I think it's completely legitimate for us as the largest funder that plays a leadership role that we should speak out on these things. So I commend you, John, for taking this stand, which is consistent, as you said, with this administration. Let me ask you, you mentioned the president, you mentioned the United Nations. I was at the United Nations last year when the president also spoke on the issue of religious freedom. And of course, USAID, as that humanitarian arm of the United States government, oftentimes working, hand in hand with the Secretary of State, the State Department, and the number one foreign policy objective is the promotion of international religious freedom. What is USAID doing on that front?
Well, first of all, I have to say religious freedom is our priority. And I want to thank you, Tony, personally for all of your efforts, your counsel, and your partnership and leadership as chair of the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom. So thank you for all that you do. So as you very well know, Vice President Pence created a genocide recovery program to help Christians, Yazidis, and other victims of ISIS's war, our religious minorities. And we are honored that he entrusted USAID. We sent a special representative to work at our consulate in northern Iraq to help execute the Vice President's plan. And from that, we've actually have made progress in 5 different areas. First,
well, John, we're up against the break. We're going to have to get you back on to unpack all of that because it's definitely something our listeners are concerned about, care about, and I think it's a reflection of the values of this administration, and it's extremely, extremely important. So, John, thanks so much for joining us. Out of time, but we will have another conversation about this. John Barsa, Administrator of the USAID.